I'm going to tell you a story that still tightens my chest when I replay it. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's quiet, slow, and familiar in a way that sneaks up on you. I'm 28, living alone in a small Chicago apartment, trying to build a life that feels stable, honest, and mine. 3 weeks before all of this exploded, I drove 4 hours back to my parents' house for what my mother proudly called our early Christmas dinner, even though it happened on Thanksgiving. She said it was easier that way. Everyone was off work. Everyone could pretend everything was fine. I almost turned my car around twice, but guilt has a way of sounding like responsibility, so I showed up with a homemade pumpkin pie and a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Dinner was loud and chaotic. Football blared from the TV. People talked over each other, laughing too hard, like noise could cover tension. Plates were cleared, and then my mother stood up and clapped her hands for attention, like she was hosting an award show. She brought out a bag stuffed with wrapped gifts and started passing them around the table. My dad got a new golf shirt. My uncle got an expensive bottle of wine. My sisters got personalized bracelets and a spa certificate. Everyone hugged her, thanking her, smiling for photos. I waited, assuming there would be something for me too. When the bag was empty and she still hadn't looked at me, I asked, as casually as I could, if there was one for me. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even lower her voice. She said, "Be grateful you can sit here." My uncle snorted and added that I should be glad they still remembered my name. The table erupted in laughter. I felt my face burn, but I nodded and said good to know. No tears, no yelling, just that. I left early, drove back to Chicago in the dark, and told myself something had to change. That night, I sat on my kitchen floor staring at my phone. I wanted to send a long message explaining how humiliated I felt, but I already knew the response. I would be called dramatic, sensitive, ungrateful. Instead, I called my best friend, Mia, and told her everything. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then said something that cracked everything open. She said that isn't normal and it isn't love, it's disrespect. Hearing it out loud made me look at my life differently. While we talked, I opened my banking app and started scrolling. Gym memberships, streaming services, a family Amazon account, concert tickets, gas money, emergency expenses, all charged to me, little things that added up over years. Moments where someone said, "Can you put it on your card? I'll pay you back," and never did. I realized I had been quietly funding a family that didn't even bother to hide their contempt for me. Mia asked what would happen if I stopped. The question scared me and thrilled me at the same time. That weekend, I made a list and started canceling. One by one. No announcements, no speeches, just confirmations landing in my inbox. With every click, I felt lighter. Days later, my mom called, upset that her gym card had declined. I told her I canceled it and she would need to pay herself. She sounded offended. I reminded her what she said to me at dinner. She gasped like I had slapped her. Then my father called. The streaming wasn't working. He said I must have messed something up. I told him I didn't mess anything up. I just stopped paying. He said family takes care of each other. I told him it goes both ways. That was the moment the ground shifted. Because my father had chosen his new family, his comfort, his image, over me for years. And now, without my money holding it together, the cracks were starting to show. I didn't realize then that this was only the beginning. That his choice would come back, not loudly, not with shouting, but slowly, patiently, through consequences he could no longer dodge. Karma didn't rush. It waited, watching who he protected, who he dismissed, and who he assumed would always clean up the mess. By the time I understood that, the balance had already shifted. The man who once looked past me was about to discover what happens when the person you overlook finally steps away and leaves you alone with the choices you made. And that realization would not be gentle. It would arrive through silence, loss, and a reckoning he never believed he deserved. That was when the waiting ended and the consequences began, for all of us. The fallout didn't come all at once. It crept in quietly, like water seeping through cracks no one bothered to fix because it had never flooded before. The first sign was the group chat. Messages started popping up about how some people forget where they come from, how money changes people, how real family doesn't keep score. No one used my name, but they didn't need to. I muted the chat and went back to work, trying to focus, but my phone kept buzzing on the desk like it was anxious for me. Then the calls started. My mother again, crying about her health, saying yoga was the only thing keeping her sane. She asked how I could do this to her. I told her calmly that I wasn't responsible for managing her emotions or her subscriptions. She hung up on me. My father followed with his usual tone, colder now, saying I was tearing the family apart over one joke. That word, joke, landed like a slap. I told him it wasn't one comment. It was years of being dismissed. He said I was rewriting history. I told him I was finally reading it clearly. That night, I did something I should have done years earlier. I pulled up 5 years of bank statements and started organizing them into a spreadsheet. Gym payments, streaming services, family plans, emergency expenses, concert tickets, restaurant bills. I added dates and notes, remembering the exact conversations tied to each charge. With every line item, I remembered swallowing my resentment to keep the peace. Watching the total climb made my stomach twist. This wasn't generosity. It was expectation. My money wasn't appreciated. It was assumed. I drafted an email to my parents and sisters. I didn't accuse them of stealing. I didn't demand repayment. I simply explained that while I was grateful for being raised, I didn't owe lifelong financial support in exchange for basic care. I attached the spreadsheet and wrote one line that mattered most. If you believe I am selfish for stopping, please look at this and ask who has actually been taking care of whom. My hands shook when I hit send. My father's response didn't come immediately. My mother's did. She called the email cruel, manipulative, and heartless. She said I was trying to put a price on her love. She said she was ashamed of who I had become. She blocked me on social media, then posted a quote about loyalty and children who forget their parents. People praised her strength. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling angry, but underneath it something else was settling. Clarity. As Christmas got closer, the tone changed. The passive-aggressive posts slowed. The calls became frantic. Subscriptions demanded new payment methods. Bills arrived. Suddenly, my absence was loud. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, the buzzer rang in my apartment building. Then my phone lit up with my father's name. Then my mother S. I ignored them. The buzzer rang again longer. When I checked the hallway, my parents were outside my door, holding gift bags like props in a play. My mother knocked softly at first, using that sweet voice she saved for witnesses. She said they just wanted to talk. I told them through the door that I didn't want to and asked them to leave. Her voice changed instantly. She reminded me they drove 4 hours. My father demanded I open the door. I said no. The knocking turned into pounding. My mother cried loudly, saying the family was falling apart and I didn't care. My father accused me of disrespect. I told them to leave or I would call security. They didn't leave. Security came. My parents argued. Eventually, they were escorted out. A neighbor emailed me later asking if everything was okay. I sat on my couch shaking, writing down everything that happened so I wouldn't gaslight myself later. I told myself that would be enough. I was wrong. They came back days later, this time with my uncle. They cornered me in the hallway. My father said I was coming home with them for Christmas. My mother accused me of humiliating them. My uncle smirked and said blood can't be canceled. When he put his hand on my shoulder, something in me went still. I told him not to touch me again and called security. This time, it escalated. Management documented it. They were warned not to return. I wanted to believe that was the end. But people who are used to control don't stop because of one warning. They stop when consequences finally stick. And my father, who had chosen comfort and appearances over me for years, was about to face consequences that couldn't be smoothed over, joked away, or quietly charged to someone else's card. Karma didn't rush. It waited, patient and precise, until there was no one left to deflect it onto. The third time they came, it finally crossed a line that couldn't be talked down, reframed, or laughed away. I was coming home with groceries when I heard my mother's voice echoing down the hallway, sharp and too loud, calling my name like she owned the space. When I turned the corner, my parents and my uncle were standing outside my apartment again, blocking the hall. My father said they weren't leaving this time. My mother accused me of tearing the family apart. My uncle smirked and asked if I really thought strangers in the building cared more about me than my own blood. I told them to leave. My father stepped closer, lowering his voice, saying I was coming home with them for Christmas, and this nonsense would end. My mother slammed her hand against the door next to my head, shouting about everything they'd given me and how I owed them. My uncle grabbed my shoulder and shoved just enough to move me away from the lock. It wasn't violent enough to leave a mark, but it was loud enough to send a message. We still control you. That was the moment something snapped into place. I knocked his hand away and said, clearly, "Do not touch me again." A neighbor stepped out, phone raised, and said she was calling the police. The hallway went silent in that way that tells you everything has shifted. When the officers arrived, they listened. They watched the video. They told my family they needed to leave and that if they came back, there would be consequences. My uncle was cited. My parents were warned. Paperwork was filed. For the first time, authority landed on them instead of me. After they left, management confirmed in writing that they were no longer allowed back without permission. I sat alone in my apartment, shaking but lighter than I had been in years. Christmas passed without a single message. No calls, no quotes, no guilt. The silence felt strange at first, then peaceful. Through relatives, I heard what happened next. Without me quietly covering gaps, my mother had to cut back. My father had to handle his own subscriptions. My uncle's reputation took a hit after the citation. The image of the perfect family cracked in ways they couldn't control. Months later, my mother sent a short email saying she missed me. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't accountability, but it was quieter. I replied calmly, saying any future relationship would need boundaries and honesty, and that I would not return to being grateful just to sit there. Hitting send didn't feel like reopening a door. It felt like locking the old one for good. My father hasn't said much since. I think that's his karma. Not loud punishment, not humiliation, just the slow realization that the daughter he overlooked was the one holding everything together. And when she stepped away, the weight didn't disappear. It shifted back where it belonged, to him. I don't know what the future holds with my family. Maybe distance, maybe something smaller and healthier. What I do know is this: love without respect is control. Family is not a free pass to dismiss, mock, or use someone. Boundaries are not betrayal. Sometimes the most powerful consequence isn't revenge. It's silence. It's stepping out of a role you were never meant to carry and letting the people who benefited from it finally feel its absence. Karma didn't rush my father. It waited until he could no longer pretend he hadn't made a choice. And when it arrived, it didn't need to say a word. It just let the truth sit there, undeniable and heavy.